Teachers of Reddit, they say there are no stupid questions, but what's the most stupid question a student has ever asked you? I was asked by a crying student once if there was a second moon. We were outside for recess, and as happens sometimes, the moon was visible. I said nope. Why? And she pointed to the moon and asked, but aren't the sun and the moon the same thing? 4th grade student, not special needs or anything. She was crying because the other kids were making fun of her for thinking the sun and the moon were the same thing. After I explained to her the sun did not turn into the moon at night and then back into the sun in the morning, she actually thought the moon was the sun turned off. I did an impromptu science lesson that afternoon with the whole class eater. Wow, so many responses. To clarify, I wasn't a real teacher, just a sub. In my state we are given provisional licenses to substitute teach and are required to have a BA or BS degree in any field, but no real training or long-term license like real teachers have. My training was a 2-hour orientation, then tossed into the pool so to speak. I did many long-term assignments at this particular school and often did day-to-day assignments and had subbed for this teacher before, so I knew she'd be okay with me going off her plan for the afternoon. Also the kids special for that afternoon, specials are classes like music, art, gym, was cancelled so we had extra time together anyway. Some pointed out that doing a special science lesson might have singled out the kid even more and or made her feel bad, but in my experience from subbing all over this district, was that when one student didn't know something fundamental, at least half of them also didn't know. I don't mean to malign this district, because education standards have plummeted around the country so it's not like the district is unique in that regard, and also many of the students came from very challenging backgrounds that affected their education, ability to learn, and so on. So the lesson turned out quite well. I established from the get-go that no question about our solar system was off limits or dumb and no one was allowed to laugh or make fun of any question. The kids had a lot of fun. Point like I thought many of the kids didn't know fundamental things about our solar system. Turned out the girl in question was not the only one to have confusion over the sun and moon, and many of the children did not even know that the earth revolves around the sun and not the other way around. The majority of the class could not name other planets besides Earth and Mars, and the majority of the class did not know how seasons work, why year is the term it is, or why we have leap years, time zones, etc. It was a very fulfilling afternoon for me and them as each question prompted another question and each answer made them light up. The classroom had a smart board, so we could pull up and read information together as each question was asked and answered, which they really enjoyed. Again, not to malign this district, but a big reason the kids were so ignorant was because at this school they simply had not had basic solar system lessons yet. In my day as a child these sort of things were learned in 3rd grade. As a side note, in this district they also do not teach multiplication facts in the 3rd grade. The kids are not required to memorize the times tables at all, nor are really taught how to do long division by hand, nor are given nearly enough time to learn and understand fractions. This results in all sorts of nonsense when they get to higher math. For example, most of the middle schoolers and high schoolers could not do math problems at the board because they got stumped when it broke down to multiplying, dividing, anything at all to do with fractions. If they did not have a calculator they could not do it. Someone asked how the girl is doing now. I'm sorry to say I have no idea. Like quite a few of the students in this district she moved fairly often, so I saw her at other schools from time to time for a few years and then stopped seeing her. So either she moved to a neighborhood in a school I refused to go to anymore, or she left the district. She'd be about 10th grade now, so I hope she is doing well. Thanks for the comments saying I'm a good teacher, and thanks for the one saying / implying I wasn't also. I really was not. I didn't have much patience or compassion nor the nerves to deal with many of the changes that happened with education in general in my state nor changes within this district in particular. I subbed for 5 years, and by the end of it my nerves were shot, and my mouth had no chill. I intended to become a real teacher. I was in a master's certification program, but had a come to Jesus moment when I realized I simply am not capable of being the effective and caring teacher students deserve. So I had to go. I have no regrets, but I do miss the kids and days like these sometimes. Eater too. Thanks for the gold, kind stranger. Ugh, this faking kid. I'm sure everyone has one in their grade. The type that is told his answer is wrong, but somehow won't accept it, and defends his factually wrong answer with the weirdest bullshit logic point. It was the year that the game Fable came out, and the slogan was for every decision, a million outcomes. This kid was in my 9th grade English class and we were learning about actual fables. This kid asks the teacher, doesn't the word fable mean for a single decision, there's a million outcomes? Cue everyone in the class slowly turning their heads to look at him. Point. The teacher said no, a fable is a short story or tale used to establish or show ethics and morals, something along those lines. Aka the actual meaning of the word fable. The kid goes, oh, well I think you're wrong cause there's this game that came out, and in the commercials it says for every decision there's a million outcomes. The teacher and this kid literally argued about the meaning of the word fable for like half an hour in class, and everyone's telling the kid he's wrong, and he refuses to accept it because the commercial said otherwise. He didn't actually use the word otherwise. I'm sure that it's out of his vocabulary range, but he refused to relent. Faking Ryan. Shut the fuck up. Teacher's assistant for a geography class. Kinda doesn't count, but whatever. I had been the tar for this class for 3 semesters and the professor had decided to retire. New professor comes in and tries to make this class as not boring that it could possibly be. In her defense, she did teach the class with enthusiasm. Anyway, the second project for the class was a short presentation about different resources of the world, renewable energy, non-renewable, etc. I tell 90 plus students and ML every single one of them to email me their presentation when they were done, and I'll put them on a list for the order of presentations. I get a good 60 to 75 presentations. The weaker presentations, I sent out an email with the list and get a good 10 or so emails back asking why they weren't on the list. I calmly explain to them the aforementioned instructions and send out a new list. Point. After the first day, 5 more students ask me the same question. A bit irritated, I explain to them as well and announce it to the class once more. Point. The list gets so long and the students' lack of preparation continue. Presentations get extended to 2 more weeks. And in those 2 weeks, the stragglers email me. Point. At this point, I've lost my hope in humanity and I just get more and more irritated. I had done everything to ensure that every one of those students knew what to do for presentations. Even if they were out sick, they still had an email that they needed to check in case an announcement was made. Point. It stuck with me for the rest of the semester, and I found out from my professor that some students complained about me as being the worst and rudest tar they ever had. Point. TLDR, I learned no one listens to you, no matter what you do the hard way, and didn't react properly to it. Let me give you a bit of context first. I teach social science in Sweden, ages 16 to 18, and this particular question came from an 18-year-old. We had been working on a theme about crime, punishment, legislation, and we had devoted a couple of hours on the issue of file sharing, whether it should be legal/illegal, the morality of it etc. So on the test I included a question about file sharing, both because I knew we had covered it in class and because I knew that every single one of them was guilty of file sharing. As I always do when handing out a text or quiz, I ask my students to read all questions before starting to answer them. As they started reading the questions, one of them looks up at me and asks, "Mr. Iloth Winter, what is file sharing?" There was a moment of complete and utter silence in the classroom, and then his classmates opened up on him, and my god, they were savage. The thing is, he just experienced a temporary brain freeze, test nerves probably, and I could see it in his eyes, right after he asked the question, that it dawned on him, you know that oh shit expression. To his credit, he took it like a champ, just sat there and nodded as he got roasted so bad not even the best burn ward would taken him in as salvageable. Point. Edited for typus, ages 16 to 8, face palms. Not a question, but more of a statement that prompted a whole discussion when I was student teaching. To set the stage, I would like to point out that I'm white and my leading teacher was African American, and the classroom was about 60% African American, 30% Latino, and the remaining 10% a mixture of Asian and white. This was also my advanced class and we were discussing the apartheid in Africa. Me. So the black Africans and white Africans student raises hand. Miss Ducky, you can't say that. Me. Say what? Student. Black. It's African American. Trying my hardest to not die a little inside. No, that is actually not the correct phrase. Can anyone tell me why African American is not the correct term for this situation? Silence. Me. Okay guys, look at it this way. Are we talking about Americans? No, we are not. We are talking about a racial issue in Africa with no relation to America at all. The definition of African American is a person of African descent living in America. So if the people we are talking about are not American, they cannot be African American, can they? So to talk about the racial issue, the labels used are black Africans and white Africans, as outlined by our textbook. Student. No, you can't say that. They are African American. At this point my lead teacher is face palming. She is in total disbelief, and as much as she loved to watch me struggle, she stepped in and tried to explain it as well. 20 minutes go by of the two of us trying our best. The bell rings. The kids still couldn't figure it out. I think we both nearly cried. Edited. Forgot about formatting. Way late to the party. This is all from when I taught almost 5 years ago and copied from a post I made back then. I teach 3D modeling in a low-income area at a school that accepts everyone. I get a lot of special kind of stupid/ignorance in my classroom. Here are some of the better, shorter tales from my classroom. On the first day of class I read the syllabus and explain the college environment. I also cover the entire syllabus in classroom policies. 2 semesters ago reading the syllabus put a student into tears. Later while speaking to my boss about it, I was using too big of words for her and they made her scared. I later found out someone registered her for an advanced class with no experience. Double whammy on that one point this semester. While covering the attendance policy I said, this is college. It is up to you to be responsible. I will never call your parents and tell them you did not show up to class. Without missing a beat, 4 students left the classroom. File corruption is an everyday thing for me, as is dealing with purposely corrupt files. Student, why did I get a 0 on the homework? Me, it was corrupt. Class policy is corrupt. Work is a 0 point. Student, in high school they gave us more time. Me, this is not high school. Student, visibly angry. Well, I submitted something. I should get some sort of grade. Me, you did. You got a 0 point. Later my boss pulled me into his office with the student, where essentially the same conversation took place. And my boss gave the student a drop slip. I feel like the students I teach are the people you will all be assisting. Intro classes are the worst. Problem solving and computer knowledge is practically in the negative for 90% of my students. Some fun one-liners from students. What are these computers for? Shouldn't we be working on like Xbox or something? I lost my thumb drive, so I need another week to work on the project. What? Do you mean I can't play League of Legends in class? I'm taking a break from the assignment. Random student name just texted me that they won't be in class today. They said an imp went off and the cars won't start. You should really lower your expectations, mister, because I'm not going to do any of the homework. Student, it broke. Me, what broke? Student, this thing. Me, what is it called? Student, I don't know. I closed it. How do I get the words from here? Points at an manuscript Word file to there. Points at the browser-based text submission. Lastly, I feel I get to say something to my students that many of you want to say every day. Student, it broke. Me, fix it. If these are out of place here, I won't do any more of them and will delete this one. Hope some of you enjoyed this. Obligatory. Kevin, it's not uncommon as a teacher to have students who are a bit behind the curve in certain aspects, but 99.99999% of the time they are keen on something. They might not understand how to identify a noun or what theme is, but they somehow know how to make a mean plate of nachos. You learn pretty quick to not judge fish for their tree climbing ability. Yeah, I know. I thought this was the rule when I was teaching until I met Kevin. Kevin isn't his real name, but it doesn't matter because he can't spell it anyway. Kevin was a student of mine during my last year of teaching. He came to my classroom with very little to show for his academic past. He had moved a few times and thus was missing a lot of typical test scores that we used to try and ballpark their ability. Don't worry, it was a ballpark. We didn't make major decisions until we actually had a chance to talk and work with a student for a bit. I thought that's fine. I'll just do some one-on-one with Kevin and see what's up. One-on-one with Kevin was like conversing with someone who'd forgotten everything in a freak, if not impossible, amnesia incident. There was no evidence that he had learned anything past the 2nd grade, and now he was in 9th grade. Flabbergasted, I figured we needed to get more serious with this. If he was going to be in my class, I needed to know why and how. I decided to meet with him, his guidance counselor, his parents, and another teacher to see what was really going on. This is where it all became clear. It was by some incredible fluke that his family hadn't been wiped off the face of the earth years ago. Odds are his entire heritage was based on blind luck and some type of sick divine intervention that saves his family every time a threat presents itself. Kevin was the genetic pinnacle of this null achievement. Even my instructional lead, a woman who could find a redeeming tray in a Balrog, failed to see any reason this kid or his family should be alive today. So here's a list of events that made it abundantly clear that God exists, and he's laughing uncontrollably. Kevin frequently forgot when/where class was. On more than one occasion, I had to retrieve him from other classrooms. Kevin ate an entire 24-pack of crayons, puked, and then did it again the next day. This is 9th grade. I have no idea where he got crayons. Kevin's dad wrote tuition checks and mailed them to me, his English teacher. This was a public school. When I gave it back to Kevin, voided, to give to his dad with a brief note explaining that this is a public school, Kevin got in trouble for trying to spend it at 711 after school. Kevin was removed from the culinary arts program after leaving a cutting board on the gas stove and starting a fire. Twice Kevin threw his lunch at the school resource officer and tried to run away. He ran into a door and insisted it wasn't him. Kevin stole my phone during class. I called it. It rang. He denied that it was ringing. Not that it wasn't his. Not that he did it. No, he denied that the phone was actually ringing. He tried it 3 times before the end of the year. Kevin called the basketball coach a motherfucking beach during gym basketball tryouts were that afternoon. Kevin tried out. It didn't go well. Kevin's mom could never remember which school he went to. She missed several meetings because she drove to other schools, none of which he ever went to. Kevin tasted himself in the neck before a football game. Kevin kept a bottle of orange Kool-Aid in his backpack for about 4 months. He thought it would turn into alcohol. He drank it during homeroom and threw up. Kevin said the N-word a lot. Kevin was white. The high school was 84% black. Kevin got beat up a lot. Kevin stole another student's iPhone and tried to sell it back to them. Kevin didn't understand that his grade was dependent on tests, quizzes, homework, class walk, and participation. Kevin finished his first semester with a 3% average. He tried to bribe me with $11. Kevin spit on a girl and said you should get out of those wet clothes. The girl was the Spanish student teacher. Kevin didn't know dogs and cats were different animals. Kevin tried to download porn onto a computer in the library at the circulation desk while he was logged on. Kevin asked a girl to prom. He was in 9th grade and freshmen don't go to prom by asking for her phone number and then texting her his address. Kevin got gum in his hair constantly. Kevin regularly tried to cheat on assignments by knocking the pile over, grabbing one before I had picked them all up, and then writing its name on it wherever there was room. Kevin had several allergies, but neither his parents nor he could remember what they were. They were very concerned that the holiday party at high school, we don't have those, would have peanuts. When they finally got a doctor's note, he was allergic to amoxicillin. Kevin and his parents took a trip to Nassau. How the fuck did they even get airline tickets and forgot all their luggage at home? I didn't believe him when he told me until I talked to him mom, who told me first thing when I saw her at the bi-weekly meeting. Kevin's grandfather apparently died in a chainsaw accident. I can only assume God was looking the other way that day. In a college introductory astronomy class I had 4, we were doing a lab on the sun, where we used a flash animation that allowed you to set your latitude to anywhere on Earth on any day of the year and watch the path the sun traces out on the sky. The point was to see things like the sun setting and rising farther south in the winter and north in the summer, in the northern hemisphere, and that the night/day cycle is more severe the closer you are to the poles. One of the locations we had them look at was the North Pole itself, since there the sun moves in horizontal paths across the sky, meaning it's in either perpetual day or perpetual night. While looking at this location, one of my students noticed that the compass indicated that all 4 cardinal directions now said south, instead of north, south, east, and west. I explained that, since you were looking at the North Pole, no matter what direction you travel towards from there, you will be heading directly towards the South Pole, and therefore any direction you go will be south. Admittedly, a weird concept, so I waited patiently while the student processed this and readied their follow-up question. Does that mean at the South Pole you fall of the earth? Not a teacher, but in a high school history, during a brief covering of the Holocaust, an African American girl insisted the teacher quantify whether it was worse than slavery. At first she bemoaned the concept that the Holocaust could even be comparable, despite that no one was making the comparison but her. But then when the can of worms got open and the teacher tried to explain to her that they were 2 entirely different things that had no relation to each other, and that such genocides have actually happened throughout history to many different people, she just seemed to get confused, and then she smacked her hands down on her desk and just insisted the teacher tell us which one was worst. It was just entirely awkward. The teacher was standing there, like I don't know how to explain to you that neither one was worse than the other, because they were both terrible and entirely faking different, and the girl didn't seem to be capable of comprehending the idea that the 2 incidences weren't related. She just had to know which was worse, so she could know what her judgment should be, I guess. Not sure how you quantify such a thing, though. One was a situation that lasted for hundreds of years, where a race of people were enslaved. One was a systemic genocide of a race. There's no way to say which was worse there. That's like trying to compare the Armenian genocide to the rape of Nanking. They are both horrible, but totally unrelated, and impossible to quantify in a which was worse kind of way. I taught 7th, 10th, and 11th grade social studies in North Hollywood, California. These are paraphrased, but entirely true. Why did people in the old days use phone booths? Why didn't they just use their cell phones? Was the Gettysburg Address Lincoln's email address? Are leprechauns Jewish? Who was the first black person? Why did the Indians look so ratchet? When are we going to learn about Game of Thrones? Asked by several students at different points in a history class, after I had already explained that Game of Thrones is not set in our world. Just remembered a few others. Were there skyscrapers in Manhattan when the Indians sold it? What if Martin Luther was an alien? Asked by a 7th grader who would ask this same question of nearly every figure we studied. Why did Napoleon look so gay? One of my favorite weird moments was when the state sent us an essay question for all the students, one that would help determine how much funding the school could receive. I knew the question was too difficult for the students to understand. It asked what Isaac Newton might have meant when he said, "If I have seen further it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." I told the student to think about people who are giants in their field, not literal giants. I asked them who might be considered a giant in music. Someone shouted out Tupac. I said who is a giant in sports? Someone else shouted LeBron James. A few weeks later the principal showed me the class responses to the question and nearly every single one wrote something like this. Isaac Newton could see further than others because he was standing on the shoulders of LeBron James. Not a teacher, but I have to share this story. The first year in law school is always rough, and one way you get through it is by commiserating about the gunners, the people who always raise their hand and always spout off their stupid interpretations of the case. And I want to relate my favorite example. I'm in my admin law class as we're discussing some case, and someone raises her hand and says, among other things, "I don't think the Supreme Court really thought this case through." Now, real quickly, that is stupid. You can and should criticize Supreme Court cases when you disagree with the conclusions, but they get reams of paper from the parties arguing their positions. Then they hold conferences on each case. Then they bring in the lawyers for oral argument on each case. Then one of the justices writes an opinion, drafted by a clerk. They argue some more, and it comes out. They may get it wrong, they may miss some angles, but they think the case through. Classic first year law student arrogance. And yes, this student went to an Ivy League undergrad, but it gets so much better. As she went on about why our friends at Scottus didn't think this case through, I thought to myself, wait a second, see, our professor had clerked for Justice Antonin Scalia. The professor is liberal, but to his credit, Scalia always hired a liberal as one of his 4 clerks, to make sure he could defend his position. The case was a Scalia opinion. The textbook said it was from 1998. I googled the professor's BO. She clerked for him in 1998 and 1999. Then I looked up the case somewhere else, and confirmed that it came out in late 1998. Putting it all together, there is a 1 in 4 chance that this case, the one the student claimed that Scottus didn't think through, was more or less written by the professor, and a 100% chance that the professor spent a lot of time hashing it out with her fellow clerks and a Supreme Court justice. Not that the professor did this for other cases, though she did, but she did this for the exact same case the student was being so presumptuous about. Point for the record, the professor reacted a lot better than I would have. The professor said, I'm pretty sure the court thought this case through. This is a bit off topic, but I was a summer camp counselor some time ago, and had a cabin of about 14-year-olds. One of them was really dumb, a great kid and all but just not smart in any capacity. Point anyways, since this was a summer camp, everyone slept in these wooden cabins outfitted with bunk beds and electricity, no water, just lights. We had great cafeteria and shower and bathroom facilities, but separate from the cabins. The way we kept the cabins coolish on hot days was using some box fans in the windows, but you can imagine how well those work when the temperature outside is exactly the same as it is inside. One day it was very hot, and we had just had several days of cool weather, and this kid comes up to me and goes, "Hey, it's really hot, can you turn the AC back on?" I stare at him for a few seconds to determine if he's joking, and when I realize that he isn't, I tell him that obviously we don't have AC. These cabins had no drywall, just particle board walls, and you could see all the studs and everything, so it's pretty obvious that there's no AC. I legitimately had to climb up on the rafters and show him how the fan worked before he believed me that there was indeed no AC in our cabin. I teach music. Every year, there's a kid who's late to the concert. Every single damn time. Then they get an embarrassing C in band. So every year, I tell them what time they need to show up about 10 times. I write it on the board. I put it on our website. I put it on our calendar. I even send them those 90s-esque emails with flashing, moving text. So after a long-winded speech of when we needed to be at the concert, what we needed to wear, and what we needed to bring, Evan raises his hand. "What time should we be there tonight?" I simply roll my eyes and point at the board. The girl who sits next to Evan lets out this theatrical sigh, but Evan's hand goes up again. "Can I wear this?" He's wearing jeans and a grungy t-shirt. I sigh and point at the board, where I've written the dress code. "Do I need to bring my clarinet?" "No, Evan. I expect you to show up and beatbox your parts." I didn't even justify that with a response. Do I need to be at this concert? Well, I suppose if he didn't mind failing band, then no point. And no, Evan wasn't trolling or in special education. He was just an idiot. A truly impressive idiot. He did manage to show up at the concert, but he forgot his music because I forgot to write it on the board. Shockingly, he graduated. I'm still in awe. Back when I was a tar in my computer science program, I was tasked with helping other people with their resumes, papers, etc. So these aren't really questions that I've been asked so much as really awful writing. One guy handed me his resume to edit. It immediately stood out to me that he'd added a title to it. It says resume at the top, then his contact info, name and such, and then there's a title before it goes into the objective statement, like a miniature cover letter. I swear to God, this cretin wrote a spark of imagination as the title of his resume before launching into an objective statement about how he's the second coming. I circled it with the note, "What the fuck is this sheet?" and made sure that he and everyone else knew that it was absolutely not acceptable to title your resume anything other than resume. He ended up getting expelled for being a complete moron. A couple years later I had a guy ask me to help him with a paper he was writing on cryptography, so I had him send me a draft. It was not only not complete, but it made absolutely no sense. I've still got some of it, which I use as an example of how not to write for anyone else who needs lessons. Here's my favorite sentence. The following paragraph will give a high-level overview of each scheme stating what it does, and whether or not of the possibility of it being affected by the concerned in the mathematical advancement in solving the discrete logarithm problem. I actually don't know if he ended up doing well on it or not. He never told me the outcome. I also have a number of really dumb things that students have submitted to me in their code or written on tests. In one of my classes, I gave a non-graded test every week to try to keep track of what the students were and weren't learning. The twist was that any question that a majority got wrong the week before was repeated on the next test. I had more than one question that I had to ask 3 times before enough people could solve it. If this ever gets read I might win. I was teaching about the Cold War in a 10th grade world history class and a space race between US and the Soviet Union. I explained that the Soviets got to space first, but that the US got to the moon first. At this point a girl in my class raises her hand. I called on her and she asked, "Mister, can we break the moon?" A couple of kids laughed, but she clearly wanted an answer. I tried to be kind and said, "Do you mean like, can we blow up the moon? 'Cause if so, I mean I guess theoretically we could, but it would take a lot of explosives etc." A different girl asked, "What if we just shot it a bunch of times with a gun, would it break?" The class was laughing less now as clearly a couple of them were interested. I responded, "No, it's way too big to just shoot with a regular gun." To which the original girl replied, "Mister, is the moon bigger than my house?" A lot of kids laughed, but I was still trying to be nice. "Yeah, the moon is larger than your house." A third girl, there were boys in the class, but on this day it was only girls asking questions for some reason, asked, "Well, is it bigger than our school?" At this point you might think they were just playing, but this the 5th 6 weeks of the year. I knew these students and I can tell when they are sincere. I replied, "Yes, the moon is much bigger than this school." I couldn't remember the diameter of the moon offhand, so I thought it might be a good teachable moment, so I said, "Look, let's look up how big the moon is," and I googled the diameter of the moon. I put it on the projector and said, "Okay, look, the moon is over 2,000 miles in diameter." They don't really get it yet, so I pull out a glove and point and say, "Okay, so that is like from California to New York or so and everything in between all in a ball. So no, you aren't going to break the moon." At this point I was thinking, well, that was ridiculous, but we made it through, and they learned something. There was like a second of quiet while all this sunk in for all of them, and then, without raising her hand this time, the original question asker, in total and complete sincerity, goes, "So mister, if we killed the moon, that would end nighttime though, right?" I walked out of the classroom for a second, because I couldn't keep it together. If you're like these I have more.